Hello and welcome to Normal Islands, the Debrief, where we look at this week's political stories. I'm Curtis Daly. I will be your host this evening, and I'll be joined by Callum Taylor and Lewis Aaron for the three-way panel. Stories this week: the ICJ has given its verdict on Israel, saying that Israel's presence in Palestine is unlawful. Now, this has prompted many nations around the world calling for international law to be upheld. Unsurprisingly, the US has questioned the ruling, saying, "We are concerned that the breadth of the court's opinion will complicate efforts to resolve the conflict and bring about an urgently needed, just and lasting peace with two states living side by side in peace and security," the US Department of State told the Reuters news agency. Now, the UK has said nothing, absolutely nothing. It was very strange for Keir Starmer, a man who says he supports international law, has nothing to say on the ICJ, given its opinion on how Israel is acting unlawfully. Other headlines: Suella Braverman has caused division within the Tory party after she quashed rumours that she will defect to Reform. Instead, it seems she is likely going to run for leader, but has suggested that moving to the centre isn't what they should do. Suella Braverman, who is believed to be preparing a leadership bid to replace Rishi Sunak, said the Conservatives risked becoming centrist cranks. She has suggested the Tories should find an accommodation with Reform and welcome Mr Farage into the party following the disastrous election results that saw Labour win a landslide. So, not joining Reform, but suggesting Farage could join the Conservatives. Now on to Labour. Yvette Cooper has promised a blitz on migration, and she chose none other than the Sun to announce it. Nail bars and car washes will be targeted by immigration officers as they step up enforcement action over the summer, the Home Secretary has announced. Yvette Cooper said 1,000 civil servants working on the now abandoned Rwanda scheme will staff a new returns and enforcement programme. Writing in The Sun on Sunday, she said the programme will increase returns of those with no right to be here and to make sure rules are respected and enforced. Now, staying with the Labour Party, Rachel Reeves was interviewed by Laura Kuenssberg and was asked about the two-child benefit cap.
Right now, as you sit here as the brand new Labour Chancellor, there is nothing that you are doing that will immediately put money into the pockets of working people. And there is one thing that lots of your colleagues wish you would do, which would put money into the pockets of many families who are hard pressed by lifting the bars on benefits being paid to families who have more than two children. And it's not just a few, pockets of backbenchers. There are serious Labour figures like Andy Burnham who want you to do this. Gordon Brown wants you to do this. You could lift 500,000 children out of relative poverty straight away if you made that choice.
Laura, it costs more than £3 billion a year. And we were really clear during the election that we were not going to make spending commitments without being able to say where the money was going to come from. And if I said to you now, we're going to make those changes this year or next year or the year after, you would rightly say, where's the money going to come from that? If we're not able to say where the money is going to come from, we can't promise to do it.
Yes, it costs money to do things such as lifting 500,000 children out of poverty, and Reeves claims it will be $3 billion a year. But as Chancellor, they could make the decision to, increase taxes on the rich. That power lies with Rachel Reeves. Now, Labour for years have talked about being honest with people and that every penny would be costed. They have said they can't afford to lift children out of poverty. But interestingly, Keir Starmer made this commitment. UK will give Ukraine $3 billion a year for as long as it takes, says Starmer. So the government will make sure that there is money to send overseas to the tune of $3 billion, but won't commit to the exact same amount to scrap the two-child benefit gap. Now, whether you think aid in Ukraine financially is noble or not, the government could literally use that money to take care of those in this country. Finally, Joe Biden has announced that he is dropping out of the presidential race. Joe Biden is to step down as the Democratic Party candidate in the race for the US presidency. The US president said, "I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." Now, let's open up the panel. We're going to do this backwards, all right? We'll start off with Joe Biden since, that story came in, well, just under an hour ago. Lewis, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts? It's Jova.
Jove. I knew it was coming. There was too much pressure. I think leading up to the point of him announcing this, we had about, I think it was like 36, 37 Democrats already say that he needs to pull out. We had Joe Manchin, the now independent former Democratic senator, already say earlier today that he had to pull out. I think this was inevitable. But obviously the answer is now, who's going to replace him? I'm sure we can come to that actually in a moment. I do want to stick to Joe for a moment. My head is everywhere. It's swerving. There's so many things that could be happening. I think with Joe Biden, the problem is that we've been living in this gerontocracy for a while. The issue is that despite the fact that Joe Biden is now stepping down, it took Nancy Pelosi, a woman who is the same age as him, to convince him and get the party to convince him to step down too. We need a bit of youth in the party. We need a bit of youth in all of politics, which obviously we're blessed with a little bit more over here in Europe. But we have people who are part of the old guard. I think, I don't know, this idea that Joe Biden was unsuitable only because he was too old and he was a little bit weak on camera and he wasn't too good at debates is, I think, for me, only a small part of the problem. I think the fact that he represents a type of politics for me that doesn't even exist anymore, and keeping into, I don't know, politics of 5 generations ago. He's been in politics for the better part of half a century. I feel like it was going to be a failed campaign, regardless of how weak or old he was anyway.
Callum, I want to get your thoughts too, and also maybe respond to Lewis saying that, Joe Biden, obviously in terms of age, he's old, but he represents, this is from Lewis's words, he represents the politics of decades ago. And would you agree with that as well?
Yeah, just on that point, I think he certainly does. Although you would expect that and hope certainly that someone that's had nearly half a century, as Lewis put it, in working in politics, that they would be absolutely the right candidate for president. But I think there's been a whole host of things. It's been a long time coming. I'm shocked to see the news, given it seemed as though, certainly from Joe Biden's sort of nearest and dearest up until very recently, that he was not going anywhere. He had the whole debate debacle, the situation with Zelensky, where he called him Putin, referring to Kamala Harris as Donald Trump. There's been a whole host of gaffes, and then I think getting diagnosed with coronavirus this last week, testing positive for that's probably helped him out, because it's given him a bit of time to take a little bit of a back burner, to rest and to sort of think seriously about what he's going to do. And while I'm glad to see him stepping down, I fear that this is only going to help fuel the Trump campaign. Donald Trump's already put a statement out on Truth Social literally in the last 25 minutes or so. He's talking about immigration again. He's talking about how awful the presidency of Biden has been for the country, and how we need to make America great again. And I do worry that this scramble amongst the Democrats now is just going to lead to even less support for them come the ballot in November.
Okay, so I want to touch upon a few things here. One, I'm not sure if I agree with you, Lewis, when you say that Joe Biden represents the politics of decades ago, and whether that speaks for, those of us on the left. A lot of people charge that against Jeremy Corbyn, right? They say, well, he's talking out from the 70s. And in fact, good, he's talking about public ownership, and he's talking about raising taxes on the wealthy, rather than those at the top of the Labour Party, the Blairites, who have modernised the party, which is essentially pro-privatisation. So, in a way, that politics of decades ago, I don't think is bad. In fact, a lot of the good things that has come out from Joe Biden in terms of being quite strong on Labour. Look, I think Joe Biden was probably the most, if you want to say, radical or at least progressive president before it came to Gaza. Probably for the last 60 years. I mean, the National Relations Board, in terms of shifting the balance of power towards workers against companies, has been really quite big for Joe Biden. I mean, even just on a sentimental level, he won't cross the picket line. Again, I know it doesn't mean that Joe Biden is some kind of comrade socialist or anything like that. He's still part of the Democratic Party, which is a pro-corporate party. But he's certainly more radical than someone like Obama, who campaigned as a Bernie Sanders light, talking about fat cats and Wall Street, and obviously did nothing about it. But Joe Biden actually had some excuse me, Joe Biden actually had some policies in there. Obviously, when it came to Israel-Palestine, he's been awful. But in terms of, I mean, let's go back to you, Callum, actually. You said you were shocked that Biden said he was going to pull out. I mean, is it really a shock? It's not.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked that he's agreed to pull out. He needed to go, and he's been needing to go for a long time. I think, as someone pointed out in the comments, he's been to use the commenters' words, he's been gaga for a while now. But in all seriousness, he has been struggling significantly for a lot longer than just this election campaign, and it's long overdue. But I'm shocked that he's actually seen sense and gone, you know what? Actually, I need to, because I had visions of him running it right up until November, going ahead with it, having a huge defeat, and ending up in a situation where he wasn't president simply because he lost the election, rather than because he stepped down, which will give the Democrats 5 more years to sort of regroup. But yeah, I'm shocked he's agreed to do it, because he seems so stubborn about going. But I'm not surprised that it's come to this.
Yeah. I mean, I think had he pulled out maybe 3 weeks ago, it would have been a shock. But I think when you have establishment corporate Democrats, when you have Nancy Pelosi, Joe Manchin, Adam Schiff, actually, when they call for Biden to go, it's over. Because these are, I don't want to say heavyweights, but they are big people Joe Manchin is independent now, but the other figures are quite high up in the Democratic Party. So I think when you've got essentially the establishment turning around saying Joe Biden must go, that then becomes the mainstream opinion, which is actually quite surprising, because AOC, one of the squad, one of the more progressive side of the Democratic Party, kind of stuck with Joe Biden longer than anyone else. I mean, I'll bring Lewis in on that one, actually. I mean, I'll get back to you, Callum. But Lewis, your response on AOC kind of sticking it to the end.
Yeah, I've been following her on social media. She's been posting videos literally every night explaining why this would be an absolutely terrible idea. And, I'm not going to disagree with her, because we won't know how this turns out until we actually see, right? This is a massive risk, what they're taking. And AOC is absolutely right on this, because what could happen is that a fight could break out. We'll probably come to this in a moment, but just because Kamala Harris has been endorsed by Joe Biden, it does not mean she's going to be the candidate. So if we do go down that path where it turns into a big fight leading up to the convention, it could, fracture the Democratic Party, which is exactly what AOC has warned against. She's also warned against the fact that this could, fracture the campaigning on the ground. I am a big advocate of grassroots, on the ground, knocking on doors type of campaigning. And I think that's been proven time and time again. It's the most effective form of campaigning. And to potentially have to build up another team again, or even to take over part of Biden's team, whoever is the next candidate, it's going to affect it in some sort of negative way, right? Because they're going to want to bring in their own people, they're going to want to bring in their own managers, things are going to have to change, so it's going to negatively affect the campaign in that way. So yes,
I mean, she's absolutely right. Is that your so I was going to say, you say she's absolutely right. I mean, is that your understanding of why, or do you think it makes sense? Because to me, that doesn't really make sense, because at the end of the day, it was best to call for Joe Biden to step down 3 weeks ago.
See,
on with the race.
That's the point that I was going to round it off to. I was going to go devil's advocate and say, but on the other end is that she's right. That could happen. But also, if Biden was going to lose anyway, why not take this risk and put up a very strong candidate against Joe Biden? But I do want to quickly go back to the point that I made before about Biden being a politician of old. I don't necessarily mean that the way in age. I don't just want to be ageist. There are plenty of people his age who are very competent politicians. It's more to do with how he's campaigning, right? right? So the
Right.
reason why Trump is so successful in the way he is because, I was just reading today that the rally he did in Michigan, he stood up for 110 minutes and did a speech. Those speeches are very boring. I hate them, but the guy has got vigor. He's got energy. He constantly does these rallies. Joe Biden doesn't. Donald Trump is engaged so much on social media. He's all over the media. He was on CNN immediately after Biden announced that he was stepping down. They're not that reactive. His campaign is slow. And when I say like he's of the politics of old, he's like the old-fashioned, let's get a picture with this world leader with a handshake type of politician. That's
He's not
what
a
I mean.
populist, is he?
Yeah, he's not even necessarily
But
popular.
then no one else
I
in the
just don't think he's
Democratic
engaging
Party
with people.
is. I mean,
in a modern way.
Because obviously we are going to come on to the candidates most likely to replace Joe Biden.
Yes.
But none of them, the likely ones, are populist. Bernie Sanders was a left populist, but obviously there's no chance he's going to be the candidate, obviously. So,
but does it need to be? Sorry to interrupt, but does it need to be a populist candidate? I mean, Joe Biden.
I don't think it does
Trump,
at all.
So,
yeah,
if we can find, I think what worries me about that is who's who else it could be, which we'll come on to, but.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. It doesn't need to be, but I guess that was I was just trying to sort of push back a little bit of what you were saying, Lewis, in terms of like sort of the politics of old. But I understand in terms of you need energy, right? You might not be a populist, but you do need energy. And as you've just rightly pointed out, Lewis, I mean, Trump is going everywhere. He's done 110-minute speech is wild.
Yeah.
They are, and by the way, they are very long and boring. Trump speeches
very boring.
Actually, I wonder, did you catch up on the RNC? Because Trump, did you notice? I know this is not necessarily topical, and we're talking about Joe Biden here, but I thought it was really interesting now that you're here to talk about maybe Trump after the assassination attempt. His energy has changed. I mean, when he was the words he was using was unity. Do you think that maybe either Trump has had personal revelations since the shooting? Do you think advisors around him have said, okay, maybe you're going a bit too far with like the aggressive right-wing rhetoric, maybe pull it back a bit? But at the RNC, Trump sounded very, very different.
No, I disagree. I think there were some stories covering Trump in a way that maybe, he hasn't spoken of unity before, but also he immediately defaulted and back to who he was, right? So like, he spoke of unity. He also made this into a religious thing as well, which was very obvious. We knew he was going to do this, that it was God who saved him, or Jesus, or whoever else, or whatever else has intervened. He's going to use a lot of this rhetoric now. And I think it's working as well. I've come across quite a few people over the last week or so who genuinely thinks that God intervened in this. So they've got two angles to approach this from, right? They've got the religious angle and the unity angle, and that's newer for Trump on the unity side of things. But if you actually watch some of the speeches at the RNC and his rhetoric online, he's already immediately defaulted back into his old behavior.
Well, he's done it tonight. I've got his statement here from that we've not had a chance to get a graphic for, but in terms of what's happened tonight with Joe Biden, he's actually said it's typical Trump. He said crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president, and he's certainly not fit to serve, and never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, and not leaving his basement. All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't. And now, look at what he's done to our country with millions of people coming across our border, totally unchecked and unvetted, many from prisons, mental institutions, and record numbers of terrorists. We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly. Make America great again, in capital letters. And that was posted on his Truth Social about an hour ago, give or take. And I mean, that is typical, typical Donald Trump, isn't it?
Very short-lived then, at least. Right, let's get back to the Democratic Party. Let's talk about the successor. It's expected to be Kamala Harris, of course. Joe Biden has said that she should be the Democratic candidate. Lewis, let's get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I just really want to quickly explain to anyone like how this is actually going to work, right? Yeah. So Joe Biden has stepped down, meaning he already went through the primaries to get the nomination. And then in a few weeks at the Democratic National Convention, the DNC, they were going to officially nominate him the same way that Donald Trump just a few days ago was the official Republican candidate. Now what's going to happen, that he's won the primaries, the Democratic Party representatives from each state, delegates, will go to the DNC and they will now choose another candidate. And in theory, what would happen is if Joe Biden steps down, he has endorsed Kamala Harris. It does not mean she's going to get the nomination, but because he's endorsed her, the precedent for this is that nobody's going to run against her. Will that happen? I guess we're just going to have to wait and find out. We've got a couple of weeks now till the DNC, so we just won't know until somebody officially actually says, I'm going for the candidacy, and that's when it could start to get really messy.
Because I assume this means that Kamala Harris has said she's going to stand, but I've not seen anything from her in the last hour.
There's not been any official statement from Kamala Harris as far as I've seen since the announcement. I was actually speculating earlier, just behind the scenes with Curtis, that potentially, maybe, complete speculation with no proof, is that because Kamala Harris is almost as unpopular as Joe Biden in the polls, that they may have come up with a plan where he steps down and endorses her, and then she steps down saying she's not the right candidate. Because what, as everyone has speculated for months and months and months, is that if Joe Biden steps down and the Democratic Party sidestep Kamala Harris, that would disenfranchise lots of different types of voters, from people of color, people of South Asian descent, because she's mixed, and also women as well. It could disenfranchise those voters and then end up losing them in the election anyway.
Which might explain why she's not announced anything yet.
Right. I want to ask quickly about the process, though, because when we look at the 2016 and 2020 sort of Democratic nominee, you had obviously votes cast for a particular candidate in each state, and then at the end of each state you won a certain amount of delegates, and these are pledged delegates, right, which essentially are behold to the Democratic will, and then you've got super delegates who are essentially, they can vote with however they want. So I know it wasn't much of a race, really wasn't a primary at all, which it should have been. There were still candidates who stood against Joe Biden to be the nominee. So wouldn't the person who came second overall, wouldn't they get the most delegates? And they would most likely be the candidate. I mean, Marianne Williamson, for example, stood in the primary. She obviously would have got pledged delegates and votes. So why wouldn't we be looking at the Democratic side of this? Or was that still the case, and then just super delegates can come in and say, oh, it should be Kamala?
It would be different if this was like, I'm going to be the nominee, and then you don't end up becoming the president and you like run. So for example, what I mean is, if Joe Biden would have been picked as the nominee and he was winning all the delegates, and then he dropped out before he actually became president, then yes, you've got a bunch of candidates like Pete Buttigieg, and I can't even remember who else ran in that race from 2020 to get the nomination. But yeah, you'd have lots of candidates ready to go. They've got campaigns going, but that's not the case because this is an incumbent president who is not doing a second term. So the precedent is that nobody runs against him, and nobody did besides Marianne Williamson, which doesn't really count because she's not an elected politician anyway. She just ran on the Democratic ticket. So we don't have those alternative people to be able to run. But obviously we do have some popular politicians throughout the US, which names have been floated about for over the last few months of who could replace Biden. So I don't know. We're just gonna have to see what happens. See if anybody announces. It's gonna be quite the fight potentially, or maybe not. Maybe Kamala is just gonna go ahead.
If you were a betting man, Lewis, where would you be putting your money at this stage?
It's difficult, right? Because I think the person who would have the best chance of beating Trump right now would be Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. He's been the favorite to replace Biden for a really long time. Practically speaking, if Kamala wants to run, I think for anybody to oppose her will split the Democratic Party. And I think if she does decide to actually go for it, that people shouldn't oppose her. So I don't really know where to put my money. It all depends on what Kamala Harris does next. So
I mean, as we were talking before the show, you said it's possible that Kamala doesn't run. I would be very shocked if that happened. I think she will. And I also really would find it hard to see how the Democratic Party would go against Joe Biden endorsing Kamala Harris. For me, it's 99% certain it's going to be Kamala Harris. But you did mention that she's not doing very well in the polls. I'll put it to both of you. Why isn't Kamala Harris particularly popular in the United States?
Well, She hasn't really had much of a presence since she became vice president. I believe she was tasked with like tackling the border. Like usually when whoever gets a vice president, they'll give them some sort of like special task just to, keep them busy and occupied. So when Mike Pence was Donald Trump's VP, I think when the pandemic happened, he was in charge of like the pandemic task force. That was his challenge. And for Kamala Harris, it was the border, which obviously, according to Donald Trump, I don't know the exact stats. Everybody throws around different stats all the time, but Donald Trump and the Republicans would argue that they failed at the border. And that is the perception. That is the accepted perception of most American people, is that the border is out of control. So it's a weakness that Harris has been given this one task, and it seems like she may have failed, regardless of what the numbers say, because the numbers don't matter if the perception is that she's failed.
And also,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, has she been seen? Because I've not seen much of her for the last 4 years. Even going back to when Biden was vice president to Obama, it was very much, Obama and Biden, the two best buddies together, and that you would see them together at events, you would see them together at press conferences even. And Biden always seemed to have a much bigger presence. Anytime I've seen anything to do with American politics over the last, few years, Kamala Harris has not been anywhere in sight. That doesn't mean that it's not different, in America, but certainly internationally, I've not seen much of it. And if there's an element of that in the States as well, then it could be lack of coverage that's adding to that.
Yeah, so she's very memeable. This is the strength of Kamala Harris, right? We already got comments as soon as we went live with the video about like the coconut falling out of the tree. That was something that recently happened. I don't actually understand the meme. I don't know what it is, but I've seen it on TikTok. Like she's very memeable, and she has been ever since she ran for president in 2019/2020. So that is an advantage to her. She should take advantage of that if she's very memeable, and she's memeable in a positive way, meaning like there aren't any memes out there of her that I can think of where it's like she's the butt of the joke. That's not true. She's very, very memeable.
She's been very cringe, though. I mean, to bring the political analysis down to pound shop levels, she's pretty cringe, isn't she?
Yeah.
And also, and to be serious though, I think that look, there's a lot of racism at play here. And I'm not saying that's the reason why Kamala is not doing very well. I personally think that Kamala isn't a particularly strong candidate. If you look at her record, I mean, I was researching Kamala Harris 4 years ago, and she's pretty authoritarian. She has a terrible record when it comes to policing. She's quite strict on that. However, I mean, it was pointed out to me that she was one of the few that quickly called for a ceasefire, which is better than Biden. But I've seen a lot of stuff saying that she's the DEI candidate, right, which is a racist dog whistle. DEI essentially means that, it's institutions that are pushing people of color into positions, not on their merit, but because of their color. And it's like, well, Kamala Harris is an elected politician. It doesn't work that way. But if you've got newspapers, if you've got politicians saying she's the DEI candidate, which is code word for black, then that's going to be an issue at play here. Again, I don't think it's the sole reason why she couldn't win, because I do hate the sort of liberal identity politics, which is, well, Hillary Clinton didn't win because she was a woman. Hillary Clinton didn't win because she was a terrible candidate. She has a lot of baggage with her based on her policy positions. I think one of them based on NAFTA, TTIP, which are trade deals which shipped a lot of jobs away, whereas Trump, even though he lied in 2016, he said, I'm going to bring jobs back. He had a sort of economic populist message. Hillary Clinton is very pro-establishment. She's not likable. It wasn't because
I don't think she was worse than Trump, though. I mean, and I think that...
Well, I don't think she was worse than Trump, but in terms of rhetoric on the campaign trail, she was defending these trade deals, which ships jobs away overseas, was Trump was like, I'm going to bring American jobs back. Of course, he was lying. But obviously, people were like, I like this economic populism, which comes from Trump, which Hillary Clinton represented the establishment, which is why I'll always maintain that Bernie would have won in 2016. So what I'm kind of trying to bring it back around today, I think that Kamala doesn't seem like a particularly good candidate. That's why she's maybe not polling so well. But there is an element of racism, and especially when we're hearing these days of wokeness now. That's a charge you couldn't really give to Joe Biden. Joe Biden, geriatric. Joe Biden kind of, at least when he was a bit more coherent, kind of a strong man kind of guy, I'm Joe Biden, and all these memes with the
That's as
Dark
bad as my
Brandon
Trump
stuff.
impression, Curtis.
It's not great impressions. The Dark Brandon sort of stuff. Kamala Harris isn't particularly strong, and I do think that unfortunately a lot of the sort of wokeness bullshit rhetoric and the DEI stuff is going to come and play in this. I mean, do you think that's an accurate assessment there at all? Do you think I'm way off? I mean, that's to both of you, by the way.
The Biden campaign, I think, failed Kamala Harris at the beginning because I remember the order in which things came. So when they're about to, announce their VP, they first said that I am going to choose a black woman, and then announced later on, like weeks later, that it was Kamala Harris. So almost they did give the perception that they were reserving that seat. Whereas at that point, I think they already knew they were going to choose her, but to try and like campaign of this idea that we're going to choose a black woman, I feel like the order in which they like kind of sold it to the public, it did come across that way to people. I don't necessarily think that's what they tried to do, that they actually only reserved this seat and they didn't know who they were going to pick. They were just going to pick some black woman. I think they already knew they were going to pick her. They just marketed it very badly. So they set her up to fail in that sense. And people remember that as well. They almost did the same as well when they chose Ketanji Brown Jackson for the Supreme Court justice position as well. They marketed that really badly. And it almost like, again, ties into that idea of like DEI, that somehow these people aren't qualified and they're only getting the job because of who they are, which is ridiculous, because regardless of all of Kamala Harris's faults, she's just as qualified as the next candidate. And so was Ketanji Brown Jackson as well for the Supreme Court justice position as well. However, it is, it's being sold a lot. I do want to very quickly, without pivoting too far away, bring in very quickly Elon Musk into this as well, because he's fully endorsed Biden. And even today, I saw him, reposting anti-DEI stuff. He's very big on this, Elon. Very, very big on this whole anti-DEI stuff. And people like Joe Rogan are. It is picking up. It is gaining pace. There's always been an undercurrent of, anti-wokeness even before we use that word, but it's very much gaining traction right now.
Well, it's of course going to gain traction when Elon Musk says it, because obviously he's a billionaire that owns a communication platform. So yes, I wouldn't even say it's particularly organic. And let's be honest, Elon Musk, as of the last couple of years, has come out and basically sounds like a fascist. Yeah. I'm sorry, people might disagree, but he's literally echoed Nazi dog whistles. I mean, he blames he blames the rise of essentially blamed DEI and Jewish people. He said Jews are trying to create wokeness, essentially. I'm sorry, that's not the exact quote. I am paraphrasing here, but he's echoed this sort of stuff. I mean, Elon Musk is not a centrist. He is a radical right winger, and if he's going to talk about DEI stuff on Twitter, a platform which is huge, and of course you're going to get more and more people talk about it.
Just on Musk, I mean, how important do you think it's going to be now for this campaign? Because obviously Trump is no longer on Twitter. He's not been back on Twitter since he got banned from Twitter before Musk took over. He obviously now uses Truth Social, but Twitter played a huge part in helping the Trump campaign out in the last election that he won. And now with Musk, fully supporting him and coming out in support of his campaigns and everything, do you think that's gonna help win the election? I mean, Musk says that he's had requests recently to block lefties, but he won't do so because he wants X to be democratic and to be about free speech. But there's very clearly been a shift to the right on that site since he took over.
Yeah, just to quickly comment on that whole Twitter being democratic thing is just absolute bullshit. One of the first things that he did when he bought Twitter was ban the guy who was publicly tracking his plane, which is public information. Very, very, very pro free speech, Elon Musk. But anyway, I do think it'll have an effect, because if we think back to when Trump was elected in 2016 and even didn't get elected in 2020, there wasn't as many people who were more establishment who were supporting him, and he does have a bit more of that type of backing now. Elon Musk is a annoyingly but very powerful voice, because before he went full red pill, is that the right word? I don't know. he did attract a lot of people from the left and the right, like a lot of centrists, like a lot of people liked him from a lot of sides, and he has brought a lot of people down this red pill journey with him. And I do worry how something like that would affect the election if he's gone full blown MAGA now, absolutely full blown MAGA, and that does worry me a little bit because it means it opens up the door for more people to do that too.
Let's go to some comments then. I know there's been a bit of back and forth in there. Let's bring them up and we'll read them out. Rachel Atwood, good to see you again. I voted against Biden in the primary this spring. I voted no preference in protest of Biden's policy in Gaza. Completely understandable. I know that was the option for a lot of people, just essentially no preference. It wasn't a primary. It was a coronation, which I think was terrible. I love primaries, and I think that even an incumbent should be primaried because 4 years is still it's not a long enough time to really transform the state. But it's still a long enough time for you to go, do you know what? I don't know if I'm particularly happy with this president. And I think more democracy is a good thing. Let's go to another comment. Aidan Wellsmith, if you are on the left on YouTube, post the assassination attempt, you won't get a say. It's all been removed. I'm not sure what you're referring to here. I mean, like, what does the assassination attempt get taken down? Because we covered this video, and it's still up there, so it's certainly not been taken down. Another comment. Ali, Lewis's thoughts on Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna is one of the more progressive Democratic politicians again. I think he was part of Justice Democrats. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm going to put my hands up and say my American politics knowledge is limited on this person. I know very little about them. So I'm going to put my hands up, not try and bullshit and be like, don't know enough to give an opinion.
The only thing I really know about him, look, I know that he was a leftist politician. I think I last saw him when there was a sort of a streaming convention. I think it was Vosh, Destiny, a few other people, and they met up. Emma Vigeland from Majority Report met up with Ro Khanna and they did some sort of thing together. I don't really know much else about it, if I'm completely honest. Sorry, Ali, for giving you a very long answer on that one. Martin Arnold, if Trump continues with his unhinged, hateful response, it will work against him as people will be sympathetic to Joe stepping down. What do you think about that? Do you think that this will be too partisan from Trump and it's going to turn the so-called moderate voter off? Or do you think that actually this election is about getting out turnout and maybe Democratic voters might not turn out for whoever the nominee is going to be, maybe Kamala Harris, whereas Trump voters will? And remember, there's a sizable percentage of independents. Now, independents, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of independents backed Trump in 2016, but when polls... majority of independents supported Bernie Sanders. A lot of independents, and the reason why they're independent is they're not particularly enthralled with the political establishment. They're not particularly enthralled with a Clinton sort of kind of person, and maybe not a Mitt Romney kind of guy on the Republican side. I feel like they are more swayed by quote unquote populists. So what do you think? Do you think that Martin's right here? Do you think actually no, this is what works for Trump?
I mean, unhinged and hateful is just Trump, isn't it? And it worked. It worked the first time. So I don't know. I mean, I would like to think it will work against him. I hope people will see it and think actually this guy's just a very nasty person, and that isn't who we want running the country. But as is always the case with populist candidates, whether it's there, whether it's elsewhere, in the world, people for some reason gravitate towards them. And I do wonder if there is anything that can be done, and no matter what Trump does at this stage, I still feel. I know Rachel also asked earlier whether we could now say that Trump hasn't got it in the bag yet, whether we could stop saying Trump's got it in the bag now. Biden stepped down, and I think even with the unhinged, hateful response that we always see from Trump that Martin alludes to, I think it's going to take a miracle to see any other sort of result. But I would like to think that the people of America will look at Trump and go,
well, I mean, you say it worked. My analysis is Donald Trump
didn't.
won in 2016. Didn't win because of this sort of this unhinged, hateful nonsense, right? He won because people were sick of the political establishment. Hillary Clinton represented the political establishment. Of course, Trump represents the establishment too, but I'm talking about how in terms of rhetoric, right? And people were sick of it. And when you had Donald Trump saying populist things like bringing jobs back, right, pointing out a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders pointed out, the failings in the Democratic Party, I think people went with that. But then when Joe Biden ran, someone who was far more popular than Hillary Clinton, it didn't work for Trump. So I don't think I don't know if, I'm not sure. I mean, Lewis, do you agree with Callum here? Do you think this sort of campaigning works for Trump, or do you think it's going to alienate too many people? I mean, obviously he drums up his base very well. Is it enough to get back in?
My biggest worry with Trump was that under, the umbrella of Biden's apparent weakness and his failure in his debates, his position on Gaza, even going back to the Willow Project, if anybody remembers that, right, is that he is stained by his past. Like, even though domestically he's had some good policies, he's passed some good stuff, but he potentially damaged his voters in Michigan by his support for Israel. And then now with his weakness, I was scared that there's only a small, tiny amount of voters who I think would go back from Biden to Trump. I don't think anybody who voted for Trump in 2016, voted for Trump in 2020, watched him try to overturn an election, watched him get be found civilly liable for sexual assault against E. Jean Carroll, then get to see him be found guilty of fraud on top of that. I don't think anybody is not going to vote for him who was already going to vote for him, right? I was only scared about those very small handful of voters who were going to switch to Trump because of Biden's failures. Yeah. And now with Biden gone, I'm hoping that will go away, because I just don't think anybody else is now going to vote for Trump.
And also because Biden, again, like he's compromised, isn't he?
Yeah.
Cognitively. And I guess people are like, we can't vote for this guy. I guess, not to sound like a centrist, but like just putting a safe pair of hands.
Yeah.
But also it's what people alluded to after the assassination attempt as well, in terms of whether you've just alluded to there, Lewis, that actually everyone that's going to vote for Donald Trump is already going to vote for Donald Trump. However, there were people that wouldn't vote for Biden that now may go out and cast a vote for the Democratic candidate, whoever that may be, because Biden stepped down, which may help the Democrats out. But again, it's less about what Trump's doing and more about whether or not the Democrats can sort the shit out very quickly and come forward with a candidate that has got the head screwed on, that does talk sense, that has sensible policy ideas, and that really resonates, that contrasts enough against sort of the brash, in your face Trumpism that we see, to make people have this realization that actually one is a complete and utter clown and the other potentially is a genuine candidate for the presidency.
But there is, I mean, this election, there are zero policies, essentially. That's what's missing from this, because Trump can't attack Joe Biden on Gaza because Trump is probably more pro-Israel. I mean, he is more pro-Israel than Biden. Donald Trump isn't pro-worker. The Republican Party isn't pro-worker. Their policies is tax cuts for the rich, deregulation. They support the billionaire class. And of course, we've got more of these tech bro billionaires supporting Trump. And, Project 2025 is a dream for capital. It's a dream for people like Musk who want to pay little taxes, right? And obviously all the other things that come with it, which we can discuss about, right? But there's nothing you can really even hold Biden or Kamala on in terms of policy, because they don't have policy. Now, of course, the Democratic Party are weak on workers' rights. They're weak on unions, but they're much better than the Republican Party and Donald Trump. The only thing I could say, which was really surprising, is the Teamster union leader was invited to the RNC, which I thought was very strange for the Teamster union to do, because the Republican Party are extremely anti-union. They hate unions. They hate workers. I thought that was strange, but that's the only thing. But I don't think they're going to run on that. They don't want to run on workers, are they? And they're going to run on wokeness or whatever, or immigration. That's probably going to be the main thing, isn't it?
Culture wars. Same old, isn't it?
I just pulled up this comment from Aidan because he's saying what's interesting is all three of you are talking about personality, nothing to do with policy. And again, we're touching on that right now. It's because Trump
There's
never.
a lack of policy. You can't talk about policy when there's been a lack of policy in the election. That's probably why we're focusing on personality.
And I don't think people are voting on policy, right? Anyway, and I think that's why personality is important. Despite the fact I'd love to be like voting for people on policy, but the reality is, in the American elections, Trump didn't get voted necessarily in on actual policy. Yeah, maybe screaming about building a wall, but actually when he was in office, he utterly and completely failed at almost every policy that he said he was going to enact. And then again, he almost got in. Biden only won by about, I think it was like 45,000 votes across 3 states. He almost got in again, despite the fact that he absolutely failed. And again, the people who are voting for Trump right now are not voting for policy. They're voting for Trump. They're voting for personality. And again, Biden didn't win on policy. He won because nobody wanted Trump. That's it. And Trump, and domestically speaking, Joe Biden has actually done quite good on his policies. He's tried his best to cancel as much student debt as he possibly could. I think he's cancelled upwards of $200 to $300 billion of student debt so far. He did the CHIPS Act, he did the Infrastructure Act. I can't remember all the special names of them, but a lot of people would say on paper Biden has done fantastic on policy, but nobody cares. He's still polling terribly. People feel like he's not done a good job, despite on paper he actually has. His economic numbers are great, but nobody feels it, quote unquote, as people tend to describe. And this is why we end up just talking about personality over policy, because ultimately that's sometimes what it just comes down to, annoyingly, because I'd love to be sat here talking about policy all day.
One of our comments is just really interesting, and I was kind of alluding to what I was saying earlier. It's quite funny to think that even though Kamala is a black cop US imperialist feminist, it is ridiculous to think that the US will vote for a black woman. So yeah, Kamala is a cop. She's terrible when it comes to sort of social policy in terms of policing. I think she's been very. I mean, look, I can't. When I was doing my research of Kamala all these years ago, I had more tangible things to talk about. I can't remember specifically what they are, but I know that she's very, very authoritarian in nature. I just want to say also thank you to James Holmes again for the 5 Turn Left memberships. Very, very generous indeed. And Rachel, going back to your comments, AOC was hinting that the donor class might even try to replace Harris on top of the ticket. Not sure how that makes sense. I mean, Rachel, are you saying that Kamala is too pro-worker for the donor class, and they're gonna replace her? Because I'd be quite shocked at that suggestion too.
I think the comment, maybe, Rachel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is in reference to the fact that because Kamala is not performing as well, there's no point getting rid of Biden if he's going to fail without getting rid of Kamala as well if she's also going to fail. So they might as well get rid of them both and put somebody in who's actually going to win. I don't know if that's what you're hinting at, Rachel.
I do think it's interesting what you alluded to earlier, though, about the fact that Kamala may also announce that she's going to step down and not stand, and I do think that would ideally that's going to be the best thing, isn't it? Because if Kamala Harris runs this campaign, then I honestly, she may as well just be Biden. And like people have said, America aren't going to vote for a black woman.
She literally, I'm just going to point this out, she hasn't posted anything.
No.
Anything. It's strange. Something is going on. She's officially the, unelected candidate for the presidency of the United States, and she hasn't posted a single thing on Twitter.
Yeah. And
okay,
she knew this was coming, though, didn't she? She knew this was coming before Biden announced it, presumably. So they will have had a conversation where he has said, "I am going to publicly endorse you." And given she's not said a thing, I think what you suggested probably will turn out to be the case. Otherwise, now would be the time to say it, wouldn't it? Biden stands down, but Kamala Harris says, "Don't worry, guys, I'm here to save the day," and she hasn't done that.
Let's move the conversation on. We spent a significant amount of time on the US, but we're going to move to the UK. So, the ICJ verdict. I mean, Labour has refused to make a statement. It's been 3 days. So, I mean, look, Keir Starmer, the statesman guy, the guy who loves international law. Well, the ICJ has just said that what Israel's doing is illegal. They said it was an apartheid state, and our government has said nothing. Lewis, What's going on?
If I had Keir Starmer in front of me right now, and I was a proper journalist with a little microphone and a notepad, my question to him would be: you said that Israel isn't an apartheid state. You said that they had a right to self-defense. You don't think what they're doing is illegal. Are you the worst human rights lawyer that has ever existed? That would be my question to him, because this is what happened. That clip has been going viral. I think, if I remember correctly, it was the Jewish Chronicle that was interviewing him in that clip. That's kind of surfaced again, and it's him saying, "Do you think Israel's an apartheid state?" And you know what? If he wanted to be careful and try and get around answering that question, then yeah, maybe I could find maybe some room to possibly forgive him if he's being aggressive towards Israel as he's come into power. But he didn't. He straight up was like, "No, it's not an apartheid state." And now that's been proven wrong. And again, it's just constantly frustrating that this guy was a human rights lawyer. Even his mentor released an op-ed in The Guardian the day that, I think it was leading up to the decision, basically kind of hinting towards the fact that he was a bit disappointed in Keir, because this guy was super pro Israel, obviously are in the wrong. This is going to push people against them. This is going to push countries against them. Labour need to stand with the ICC and the ICJ. This is his mentor. And I just find it frustrating how he's been so staunch on this when you actually look at his full track record. And now he's got to answer for it.
I think, though, Starmer's problem has been on Gaza from the very beginning, since before he was even leader. His problem has been the stance that the Labour Party took against Jeremy Corbyn's leadership on anti-Semitism due to Corbyn and the party's stance on Israel and Palestine under the Corbyn leadership. They spent so much time calling anyone that spoke out in support of Palestine anti-Semitic, and made it such an ingrained part of the Labour Party, to the point where you're more likely to be kicked out of the party if you're Jewish for on that issue than anybody else, that Starmer and his team, they've tied their own hands behind their back. They can't comment on it. They can't speak publicly in any way that seems to be supportive of Palestine without having to tread very, very carefully, because if they do, they are going to meet their own definitions of what they claim was anti-Semitism. And it's put Labour in this position where they can't even make their mind up on the ICC thing, where 1 minute they're saying they're gonna withdraw and they're not gonna oppose it, and then they're saying, oh no, we will, and then we're not sure, and then, well, it depends on this and it depends. Like they can't make their mind up it, and it's because they know that the second they say that they support Palestine, or the second they say we recognise the ICJ ruling, people are going to come at them and say, but hang on a second, when Corbyn said that 5 years ago, you accused him of being an anti-Semite. And I honestly think that that's where this stems from. There's probably more to it, but I think for me, it all stems back to the way that Starmer and his mates behaved under the previous leadership on this issue. And unfortunately, it's led to this situation where we've got a Labour government, a Labour Prime Minister who, like Lewis says, a human rights lawyer, who can't even call out human rights abuses when the international courts are calling it out.
Lewis, I mean, you made a good point, though. I mean, we were talking about that viral video where he was straight up asked, like, yeah, I mean, Israel an apartheid state? He said no. And I think you are right in terms of, I think what we've seen over the last 9 years, that you probably can't get into power if you are, I mean, in terms of forming a government. I mean, you can become an MP, an independent MP, as we've seen, but you can't become prime minister if you're aggressive on Israel. I mean, the Israel lobby is pretty powerful, right? That you are literally called anti-Semitic for just the mildest criticism, or just pointing out that Israel is an apartheid state. So I do understand if Keir Starmer was trying to be mealy-mouthed about it, like, oh, I don't know if I want to say it's an apartheid state, but there's problems there,
That's
whatever.
pre-election, though, right?
But that's pre-election, right? Yeah, but here's the thing, right? They're now in power. There's no opposition. The Tory party got 24% in the polls. They are way behind. Sorry, 20%, wasn't it? Anyway, they are way behind, so they don't need to be careful as much with their messaging. So you're absolutely right. I mean, Starmer is the worst human rights lawyer probably ever, right? But it's very interesting to touch on what you say, Callum, that when it comes to the ICCs, I mean, we still don't know exactly when it comes to the arrest warrant what's going to happen there, but it's very likely that the ICC will issue an arrest warrant to Benjamin Netanyahu. The Tory government's policy was to try and block it or at least delay it, which is awful. And Labour literally announced within their first week saying, if there is an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, we won't block it. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought, do you know what? That is completely in accordance with international law. When Keir Starmer says he respects our international institutions, that is consistent with it. Yet within a few days, they U-turned on it. So, of course, none of us are surprised about Labour's silence on the ICJ. But you can't say that you support our international institutions if you won't echo the ICJ's ruling. The ICJ's ruling was 15 judges, I believe. It was pretty stringent in their research on it, and they're looking at the evidence. Callum, I mean, what's going on here? I mean, look, surely Keir Starmer can get away with saying, well, I support the ICJ. He could even export his opinion. He could even say, look, I'm not saying that I think that Israel was an apartheid state, or I think these things, but the ICJ says it, and I back the ICJ. Can't even just say that.
I think, and that's all he needs to say. That's all he needs to say is that you know, we respect and recognise the ruling. That's all he needs to say. He doesn't even need to elaborate any further. I think another big problem for the government at the moment is obviously the allyship that we have with Israel. If this was America that were committing these atrocities, the government would also be struggling to call them out. When Russia are committing war crimes in Ukraine, Keir Starmer has no issues at all, rightfully saying these are war crimes that have been committed. But when Israel are committing war crimes, oh well, I couldn't possibly say, it's not for me to judge, and we need other people. But you've got the ICJ ruling that it is an apartheid state. You know, that it is occupied territory.
If I can push back on something, I think, okay, controversial statement, guys. Here we go. Israel gets too much flack. Do you know who needs to get more flack? The US. Because at the end of the day, the reason why Israel it's not as powerful as we make it out to be. Like, yes, you can talk about AIPAC and Labour Friends of Israel and Conservative Friends of Israel and the money that goes through these things and keeping politicians sweet. Like, yeah, all that's a thing. The true power of why Israel is allowed to do what it's allowed to do is because of the US.
Yeah.
And how they utilize Israel as a strategic point in the Middle East. It's the US who are trying to stop the ICC ruling by lobbying our government to stop that warrant from going through. But even going back further, the current prosecutor, who's a British prosecutor, he guess who opposed him getting into power when the UN were trying to put him in power? The US, because he has a record of, by the way, not just being, I wouldn't use the word anti-Israel, just critical of Israel, but he's also taken down like other, Islamist type of groups as well, and other Islamic extremists, while also going for other groups as well. So that's why he was the perfect candidate, because he wasn't just critical of Israel. He was basically, he's critical of everyone under the guise of human rights. Then actually the prosecutor that came before him, the Trump administration sanctioned him because he was going after Israel too. They literally put sanctions on the prosecutor of the ICC. That is how far the US are willing to go to protect their interests in the Middle East. And this is why we need to sometimes focus more on the US power of why Israel are allowed to do what they're allowed to do, rather than just focus on Israel itself.
Before you come in, I think, Lewis, you're absolutely right, by the way. I wouldn't phrase it as in with Israel gets too much flack. I mean, I don't think you can ever give too much flack to a country.
Fair enough.
Genocide. But you're absolutely right that, yeah, largely this is the US, and it's the US hegemony. So, I mean, Rachel Atwood said in the comments, is Keir Starmer a committed Zionist as much as Biden? I don't think he is. I think he's a committed servant of power, and right now, the mega power in the world is the US. And I think if the US actually took a stronger stance against Israel, I could totally see Keir Starmer being stronger on Israel because of the US. And we don't have an independent foreign policy, right? It is imported from the US. I do think, of course, Israel obviously has an influence over the Labour Party in terms of its policy. They give money to cabinet members. So there's definitely an influence there. But I think if you ask me, Keir Starmer, I mean, I don't want to say loyalty here, but if he's swayed on anything, it is mostly the US, I think. Again, to reiterate, if the US was stronger on Israel, I think the UK would back them on that as well.
Because I totally agree with both of you in terms of the influence of America, and I just wanted to sort of put out to you both, kind of, in relation to the previous conversation in terms of Donald Trump, because a lot of people argue that Trump's, when I often hear this argument that, well, when Trump was in charge, there wasn't any wars. I mean, there was, but that's by the by. But how do we feel about a potential Trump government, and will Trump being back in the White House, do you think that will change America's foreign policy on Israel and Gaza, or will it double down?
It will absolutely strengthen it. We can't forget, again, as I just mentioned, the Trump administration sanctioned the previous ICC prosecutor. They moved the U.S. embassy from, I think it was from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
They are super pro-Israel in a way that I don't think even Biden, I think Biden even gets outshadowed. I don't think it's even Trump himself. It's just like the right-wing conservative America. They're super pro-Israel.
It's the Republican Party, but
yeah.
So, I mean, I would say it is Trump himself, because Trump is someone who is willing to go against the Republican establishment in times. Doesn't always necessarily mean as for good reasons, but he has been. He can bend the RNC or the Republican Party to his will. They are weak to stand up to him. So if Trump wanted to, he could totally be like, "Oh, I'm more pro-Palestine." But he's the most powerful person in the Republican Party. He is the Republican Party. So I would say that Trump's ideological view on Israel just lines up with the GOP.
I would actually push and say that his probably hatred for Muslims probably drives him more towards supporting Israel. Because again, like this idea,
I think a lot of Zionists have that view, and I mean,
they do.
They do. There are a lot of Zionists. Not every one of them. I don't want to smear all of them, but a lot of Zionists are incredibly Islamophobic.
But just to remind everyone, it was only, I think, about a year ago where Trump was having dinner with Nick Fuentes, a literal neo-Nazi. Not even in the hyperbolic sense where sometimes we're like, oh, that person's a bit like a Nazi. No, he is a literal neo-Nazi. He was even commenting on the fact that J.D. Vance's wife wasn't white just 2 days ago on his stream. And then he also had dinner on the same night with Kanye West. And this was at the height of him tweeting out about the worst Jewish conspiracy theories in the world. Like, this is who Trump was having dinner with. So I don't think he's as friendly to Israel as people might work out. I think it just ends up lining up with other parts of his ideology that he wants to strengthen. The war on terror, strong against Muslims, all this other type of stuff as well.
Let's move on. Again, time is going very, very fast, and we're in our second story. But we're going to move on to the Tory party. So, Suella Braverman. We have to, yes. Suella Braverman, so it looks like she's staying inside the party. I mean, there was speculation that she was going to defect to Reform. That would be unwise, by the way, because in her seat, Reform got 18%. I think they were 5th. So she would never retain her seat as a Reform candidate, but she possibly could at the next election as a Tory candidate, right? But she says she doesn't want the party to move to the centre, and she went as far as saying that those who do are centrist cranks. Now, I do have to say, critical support to Suella Braverman. There are a lot of centrist cranks out there. The term crank is thrown around by the centrists so much, particularly towards the left, but centrists are just as much, if not more, ideological. However, she also said she would welcome Farage to the Tory party. So let's talk about Suella Braverman. She is happy to cause divisions in the Conservatives. Has this made it less likely that she's going to be leader?
I don't think so. I'm kind of at this point. I'm kind of hoping that she does win the leadership, because if she becomes leader of the opposition, and she brings Nigel Farage and co into the party, I honestly believe that will firmly solidify the Conservatives not winning another general election for at least a decade, because the general consensus of Conservative voters don't want this right-wing Conservative party. We know that because of how people voted, how many people didn't vote Conservative, and the huge share of the votes that they lost in the election. And actually, anyone with any sense within the Conservative Party has come out and said very clearly that if the Conservative Party is to survive, they need to move back towards the centre. Those centrist cranks that she refers to need to be the ones running the party if they want to survive and keep going any longer. And actually, if Braverman becomes leader and brings in the likes of Farage and Lee Anderson back and the rest of them, one, I think that will help get rid of Reform, because the Conservatives will just replace them. And I honestly think they will then perform as well as Reform have done, and we'll be in a situation come 5 years down the line where we've got this far right, really far right, hard right Conservative Party that is basically Reform UK, that still get 4 million of the votes, and hopefully we'll have a huge boom in votes for other left-wing parties and have this wonderful government that exists with all these left-wing parties in charge. I mean, that's a utopia and a dream, obviously, but in short, I do think it would help cripple the Conservatives. If the Conservative membership have got any sense, though, they'll ensure that doesn't happen, and they will install somebody a little bit more to the centre. Probably, I think they could do with somebody pretty boring at the moment, someone that just sort of is in there, gets the cogs going, not like a big personality, not someone that we'd necessarily hear lots from at the moment. Somebody like Tom Tugendhat, who's run before, who isn't widely known about. I mean, most people in the street wouldn't even be able to tell you who he is, but he's not this sort of extreme on one side or the other.
I mean, Tom Tugendhat is... First of all, there's no moderate Tory, because he's come out and supported jail sentences of Just Stop Oil. And if you're someone who is a so-called moderate, even if you're a social conservative and you're kind of like, yeah, no, I'm glad they're punished, the length of their sentencing is crazy. And when Tom came out and said this is good, I mean, he's not even a moderate. Lewis, let's go to you. What do you think? Are you on the same page as Callum, or do you have a slightly different analysis here?
There's a part of me that like kind of aligns with the theory of Callum in terms of like that's how it could go. But I would always say be careful what you wish for. I'll take you back to a time where we all laughed at the remote idea of someone like Boris Johnson becoming prime minister, right? That was absolutely and utterly laughable at one point, and then it became reality. Not only did it become reality, he won like a very large landslide in terms of the history. Was it the biggest one in however many years? There's always some record that's broken anyway. I'd be very careful what we ask for, right? Even if it could be like a Trojan horse type thing, right? If Braverman wins the leadership and invites Reform over, do we think that Nigel Farage is going to be loyal to the Conservative Party or loyal to Suella Braverman? Absolutely not. He is loyal to one thing, and that is his ego and ideology. Two things.
And Trump. 3.
But I think even align himself with Trump, or right, it just only feeds himself, right? It helps his image. I think, as soon as he came into the party under Braverman, he'd be scheming against her to become leader from day one. And again, we could argue that people wouldn't vote for Nigel Farage, but don't forget that what some of the data is saying about how young men are moving towards more right-wing extremists in terms of politicians. We know that there is some data out there that supports that a lot of young men did vote for Reform, and we're talking about in 5 years' time. So that population of people will increase too. So
for 4 million voters, though, it's the same as what UKIP got in 2015. And I mean, if the Conservative Party essentially becomes Reform, obviously the Conservatives are going to win back those votes that were lost to Reform. But are they not then going to lose? Like when you've got people. Like, oh my God, what the hell is his name? He does that. Rory Stewart's his name. That's who I'm thinking of. When you've got people like Rory Stewart who like didn't even vote Conservative in this election, and bear in mind it wasn't that long ago that he was putting himself forward to be leader of the party. When you've got people like him in the party saying, we can't vote for this has gone too far to the right when Sunak's in charge, those people aren't going to get behind the Conservatives when Nigel Farage is running the show.
But it's not just about the Tory party, though, is it? It's about the Labour Party as well. If they fail over the next 5 years, if they don't build enough houses, if a war starts or a pandemic happens, as we've seen, these things can happen, right? And if they utterly fail, then yeah, it could maybe be like, okay, let's go back to Conservative now.
Yeah, and then the right-wing populism comes back.
I want to jump in here, right? And I respectfully disagree with you, Callum. So
that's okay.
I think there's no strategy for the Tory party. There's nothing they can do. If they quote unquote move to the centre, right? I feel like all that's going to do is drive a bigger wedge between them and Reform. Reform can pick up on their populist message and say, look at the Conservative Party, look at the Labour Party, they're exactly the same, but from the right. I think they'll actually recruit more people to Reform. If they move, or they continue this right-wing trajectory, it's shown that it cannot stop the rise of Reform, as we've seen in this election. Let's be honest, we've had Suella Braverman saying, pandering to the culture wars, and many other Tory politicians do it. Rishi Sunak too, talk about the woke culture and stuff, and that hasn't stopped Reform. The same way is how the Labour Party pandering to right-wing politics on social conservatism and immigration doesn't stop the rise of right-wing politics. It doesn't. And as we've seen in France, only the left can stop the right. Okay, but the idea have been. But I mean, I'll finish my second point and I'll let you come back in. But I also don't see a utility in someone like Braverman or Kemi Badenoch becoming leader, because even though electorally I don't think it matters either way, what would matter is leader of the opposition. Are they going to be more moderate in their language and their politics, or are they going to be more extreme? And I think, for me, politics is essentially debates. That's where ideas are won and lost, is what people talk about. And if we've got a Tory party talking about going more to the centre, shall we say, then I think the national discourse may not be as right-wing. I would like to see the Tory party fight Labour on a more so-called centrist agenda than Kemi Badenoch dragging Labour to the right, because Labour are incapable of standing on their own. And when they're attacked from the right, unfortunately, Keir Starmer, his political intuition is just to move to the right. So I think that the utility here is to have a so-called more centrist leader, because I think that it could mean that the national discourse isn't quite so poisoned. And because I don't think that Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman would make it less likely the Tory party, coming back, or a centrist leader coming back. I think they're toast regardless. Then I would rather see a politician at the dispatch box who isn't talking about trans people in a negative way or the woke agenda. I think it's better for the national discourse, and it might mean there's more space for the left to grow, right? We can then say, oh, look, the Tory party is talking about this particular thing. The Labour Party sounds exactly the same. And in a similar tactic with Reform, the left can say both parties, as we've been doing before, both parties are exactly the same. Here's the left-wing economic agenda. I just think in terms of utility, the entire national discourse, it would be better if the Tories went more moderate, but I don't think it helps them electorally in any way. And I don't think that a right-wing leader makes them less viable in any way either.
And I agree with you on the leader of the opposition stuff. We definitely don't want somebody further right pulling Keir Starmer in that direction. That is not what we want. We want somebody, I mean, ideally we want someone to the left of him doing that. But I do want to push back slightly on this sort of, you talked again about the right. I think you used the words the rise of the far right. And I think we need to be careful, I think, because the way I see it, there is no rise of the far right in this country. There is no appetite for the far right in this country. The far right in this country today, the same far right that existed 15, 20 years ago. It's the same numbers, it's the same people, or it's the kids of those that have gone before, whatever. But in terms of physical numbers, I don't think we have seen the country lurch to the right. I would go as far as to argue that the country massively rejected that, because when the Conservatives started going more towards the right, it led to them having one of the biggest defeats they've ever had at the last election. And let's remember that people didn't vote Labour because they wanted Labour. They didn't vote Conservative because they didn't want what the Conservatives were offering. And yeah, all right, Reform got 5 seats, but Reform got 5 seats because of the electoral system that we have, and the way that the supporters of that party sort of happened to fall within the areas that it was on individual votes, it was the same as what we're voting for the far right, 10, 15 years ago. And I think that actually there is a part of me that thinks, should we just let them get on with it? Let them do their little thing. Let them, if they want to try and stoke the culture wars, let them just do it in their own little bubble and just try and ignore them. Obviously, we can't ignore them when they're in opposition and they're constantly shouting back and trying to pull the Labour Party to the right, which I do acknowledge. But I think in terms of the wider discourse, the country don't want that. And if the Conservatives move more in that direction, okay, it is going to pull Labour that way, but I wonder whether that is going to open the door for the left even more, because people will realise, well, actually, we didn't want the Conservatives when they moved towards the right. We don't want reform. And now Labour are moving even more towards the right. So let's vote for the alternatives, whether that's the centrists going for the Liberal Democrats, whether that's voting Green, or Plaid or SNP, depending on where you are. But do you not think it could open it that way? Although then Lewis is...
Well, I'd say, Lewis, I want you to jump in and give your view on this.
I often think about how sometimes, because we focus on politics so much, right, that we're very well aware of like people like Suella Braverman. I do still question like how popular she is outside of political circles who actually focus on it, right? Like, yeah, she gained some traction with certain virally moments, but I still question like how popular her rhetoric would be outside of like going actually into the true spotlight, right, as the leader of the opposition. I just feel like this idea of her waging a woke war, the wokerati, her clips of saying, she dreams of a picture of a plane taking off and it'll be on the front of the Telegraph the next day. Like, I think even comments like that, like, are almost like, I won't use the word too intellectual, but like the reference to wanting it to be on the front of the Telegraph is almost like it's extremely like conservative middle class, right? The people that she needs to win over to be a successful leader, the people who obviously Nigel has, and bringing them together, maybe that would work, I don't know. I just don't feel like she would be able to lead the Conservative Party to any form of success, because ultimately I just don't think she appeals to those type of people that they need to bring back over.
I kind of think that's not, whether the Tories can be electorally successful, I don't think that's relevant, because in my view, they cannot be electorally successful for a long, long time. And I think the Tories are toast, no matter which way they go.
But let's not forget, we thought that about Boris Johnson, though, 5 years ago. But
the Tory party were not in that state, because they're out of government, right? So even when Boris Johnson became leader, they were still the government, and the Labour Party didn't look like they were anywhere near power, especially after 2019. But they're out of government. And we have to remember, why did people reject the Tory party? Largely, they didn't reject the Tory party because of Suella Braverman's comments or Kemi Badenoch's comments on the woke agenda. They rejected the Tory party because of people's material conditions. They rejected the Tory party because they screwed with the economy, because they screwed with mortgages. And if you're a Tory leader, the last thing you want to do is fuck up people's mortgages. That's your constituent, that's your base. So we have to look at the material thing here. And also they felt like the Conservatives were failing left, right and centre on literally everything, and they simply just wanted to kick out the Tories. So I don't think I think we might be reading in too much in terms of like this sort of right-wing rhetoric. I don't think it's relevant on whether the Conservatives are going to be successful or not. They're not going to be successful for the next 5 years. I think what is relevant is how successful right-wing parties are. How many more seats are Reform going to get? Could Reform be the opposition? Could the Liberal Democrats become the opposition? And I think, for me, my fear is the political debate. I want to be talking about workers' rights. I want to be talking about climate change. I want to be talking about inequality. I want to be talking about privatisation. And it may be possible that if the next Tory leader is someone, again, quote unquote, centrist, that isn't muddying the debate with attacking trans people, but trying to talk about something else, and then we could say, well, look, the Labour Party and the Tory Party don't want to address the material needs. I think it's just better for the debate if that happens, rather than a so-called populist or right-wing politician who, by the way, I think in terms of the membership, they're more likely to go with someone like Braverman than Tom Tugendhat. But I think it's worse for the national discourse. That's my particular view on it. I don't know if you want to jump in.
I would push back slightly because I think rhetoric is really important when you're in the opposition, right? You need somebody to be able to use rhetoric to take down your opposition. Obviously, yes, the
Well, that's
Conservatives.
my entire argument, though, is that rhetoric is important and political debate is important, which is why I would rather see a less toxic Tory leader because they are the opposition. They are in the dispatch box every single day. I would rather a so-called more moderate language Tory leader than someone who whips up quite right-wing lines. I think that's better for
I
politics in
agree.
general.
That's definitely what we need because, as much as I love how entertaining politics is, I would love for it to be a bit more boring because it's become so toxic. However, I don't think necessarily that they obviously lost because of policy. They failed massively on policy. That's just a given, right? But to get back into power at some point, they need good rhetoric and perhaps obviously some good policy too. And they need a person who's going to be able to, bring that to the table. Maybe that's going to be in a way that's not toxic. Maybe that's going to be in a way that's like somewhat fair. I'm going to use the word somewhat because, obviously they're going to be a bit attack doggy. They're going to be a little bit culture war-y. That's always going to be there. Hopefully they'll move away from somebody as toxic as Suella Braverman. We will just obviously have to wait and see.
Let's bring up some comments and see what people are saying in terms of this. Let's go again. Super Dizzle 84. Very naive to think the Tories are toast. They came back after Tony Blair destroying John Major. If they clean house, i.e. trust ECC, they will be back. I just want to say, I'm not saying that the Tories are toast forever. I'm talking about the next 5 years. I cannot see the Conservatives coming back in the next 5 years. That doesn't necessarily happen after a defeat like this. Doesn't mean that they can't come back in 3 terms. I mean, that's definitely possible. But I just don't see how, given a pretty big night for the Reform Party winning millions of votes. And obviously, some people say, look, they got the same amount of votes as UKIP, but it's not just how many votes they got, even though that is important. It's how they've managed to take away from the Conservative Party. Like the UKIP didn't cause the Tory Party to completely collapse, right? Whereas Reform have done so well off of the Conservatives failing pretty miserably. And I think in PR as well, they would get even more seats. But so in the next 5 years, I don't see the Tories coming back, but that doesn't mean I don't think they're going to come back ever in the future. But I do worry about, Callum, I think you were saying that, look, there isn't really an appetite for far right politics as maybe there are in the US. I actually agree with that. But it doesn't mean that I don't think our politics hasn't shifted rightwards. I think it absolutely has. And I think that doesn't mean that I think Reform or maybe a fascist far right party suddenly explodes and becomes huge. But I do worry about having 10 Reform MPs or 15 Reform MPs, or maybe a Britain First kind of party getting 1 seat, which could happen. I think that's very, very bad. And we are in a different time to of 2015. Even though UKIP got 4 million votes, politics to me is far more toxic than it was back in 2015, at least in terms of rhetoric.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. Although I do have to agree slightly. I think with is it super Dizzle, because I think the Tories were toast in this election, and we knew that, and we said that, and it was the Green Party slogan throughout, wasn't it? The Tories are toast. We heard that a lot, and it was true. They were, but I do think we have to be. I think we have to be careful, and we have to. I think it all depends on which way they go. I really do. I think if it goes down the Suella Braverman route, then I think they genuinely will be toast. I think they'll ruin it for themselves. If they get someone who's got a level head, who works, who focuses less on the culture wars, more on general opposition politics, and actually tries to make them. We've heard people saying about use the term the leaders are back in the grown-ups are back in the room again. I mean, I said it felt like that myself as well a couple of weeks ago. I know you were that you're not a huge fan of that in this scenario, Curtis, but I think that's what the Conservatives need now as well. They need some grown-ups at the top of it, and at the moment, well, they've not had that. And at the moment, those that are sort of like between Badenoch and Braverman certainly they're not going to have that. And until they get some grown-ups in charge of the party again, I think they are going to continue to be toast. So I think it's naive to think that they're going to be toast no matter what. But I think it's fair to say that if they keep going in the direction that they've moved in the last 5 years, that they will be, because they've been rejected. People don't want them. And even under the first past the post system, which has led to 5 seats for reform, the country don't want that type of politics. And actually, the vote share for the left went up as well. We saw, the Greens have got 4 MPs. We've got 5 left-wing independents. So we saw other seats where independent candidates that were on the left and the Green Party too, I think even about 40 seats, were coming in second place, and we're doing really well and catching up with the people that they were behind. So I think we need to not forget that as a whole, the country is not right wing. Yes, our politics has moved that way, but I think that's despite that's in spite of the voters rather than because
I absolutely agree, because I think I can't remember which pundit said it on Twitter today, but said kind of agree that politics hasn't moved right wing, and yes and no. Voters, I don't particularly think have moved right wing. I think actually when it comes to economic policies, they're very left wing. Our political establishment has moved right wing.
Yeah. So
I think that's to me the analysis there. But talking about grown-ups in charge, let's go back to the Labour Party. Yvette Cooper, she's made an announcement of an immigration blitz targeting nail bars and car washes. Now, this is a clampdown from Labour in terms of immigration, and she wrote a piece in The Sun. But there's no talk about integrating migrants from being exploited by businesses. Instead, they want to mass deport people. So certainly as a changed Labour Party, I mean, what are your thoughts on Labour going after migrants and illegal immigration as their priority?
I think what frustrates me is like the performance of it, right? I think we could debate migration and who needs deporting and who doesn't, or whether we should be deporting anyone at all. We could debate that all day. I don't think that's necessarily the debate. For me, it's about like the performance of it, right? These are people who, for whatever reason that they're here, right? They could have been trafficked, they could be vulnerable, they could be poor. There could be a million reasons why they're here. I think if you're going to deport people and you're going to do that, and I might not agree with it, just do it and just release a statement through the Home Office, right? I don't think you have to make a performance of it the way that Cooper has. And that's what frustrates me, because these are people, these are humans. So to make a performance out of it for me is just, touching on this idea of, the Labour, the new right wing, and it's very disappointing.
I wonder if this is going to settle down in the coming months, because it feels very much like the Labour Party is still. They almost still feel like they're in campaign mode for the election in terms of they're trying to appeal to all these people that they were trying to win votes from. And someone needs to just remind them that the election's over. Like, you don't need to. It's like when we were talking about Gaza earlier on. Like, you don't need to take these stances anymore. You don't need to be performative around the culture wars.
That's their politics.
You can actually just lead the country now.
I mean, maybe you're being too kind to them. But, oh, look, the election's over. They don't need to pretend to be right wing. But let's be honest,
they are.
They are, aren't they?
Yeah, it's really sad to see. I'd hoped that Labour wouldn't sort of go down this road in terms of migration. I mean, to the point where when you earlier on before the show, when you told me about this story, my immediate reaction to it was, are you sure that's right? Are you sure that's what they're doing? Surely the Labour Party aren't doing that and announcing it as this. But they were, and they are. And yeah, and it's sad. And Lewis talks about people's backgrounds and why they're here. I mean, I know it's something that comes up a lot. I mean, talking about the nail bars, for example, we know that there are, it's not just that, but there are businesses like nail bars and other similar ones that historically have been rife for human trafficking, where they've got people that are working who are being trafficked, who are victims. They're not people that should be raided and be sent on an aeroplane or on a boat and sent back to another country. They're people that need help. The people that need, it's like the people coming, in the channel that are paying money to the criminal gangs to get here. They're vulnerable people that need help and support, and we shouldn't be making a performance of it. We shouldn't be making a show of it. We should be saying, you know what, we're going to go to these places and we're going to help these people rather than deport them.
I mean, obviously, in terms of this immigration policy, we all disagree with it, and especially in certain circumstances where these people might have been human trafficked, and the response is just to send them back. Where, I mean, how'd they get trafficked in the first place? They put them in danger, right? But I talked about how the electorate weren't as right-wing as some people make them out to be, because economically they're definitely on the left, right? But when it comes to crime, when it comes to policing, when it comes to law and order, I would say majority of British people are a bit more conservative on that. And this policy, we are the ones in the minority here, right? This will be very popular with the electorate. And even though I wanted to see a more pro-immigration stance from Labour, I'm dismayed at three. You got the Reform Party, you got the Tories, and Labour are pretty anti-migrant. There's not enough pro-migrant voices anymore in the mainstream. But isn't it necessary? And when I say necessary, in terms of just getting the consent of the British people to I mean that is what they support. So even
is it the policy? Is it the policy that they support, or is it the headline of the policy? Is it, well, we're deporting more people, brilliant, because they don't have a right to be here because they're illegal immigrants and they should be gone? Is it that they support? Or is it the policy that people who have been human trafficked, who are actually victims, who need support, are going to be treated like criminals? Because I often wonder whether, and maybe I'm not giving enough credit to the average voter, but I wonder whether we understand the ins and outs and the depths of this because we follow politics so closely. For your average person, if the government say we're going to raid all these places and get rid of all the illegal migrants, they think great, because they shouldn't be here. They're illegal. They don't have a right to be here. And I wonder whether the average voter understands that these are actually vulnerable people.
Yeah,
that
I know what
have
you're
been
saying
trafficked.
Here.
And that element of it.
Well, I think it's probably true. Look, if you're someone who says, I think our benefit system is too generous, we should cut the amount of spending, and that same person then loses their job and then is on benefits, that said person will be like, oh my God, I can't live on this. It's too low. When someone says, oh, immigration is too high, we need to clamp down on it. But let's say this person had a partner from abroad and that immigration policy has now affected their relationship negatively, they'll think differently of it. So I think it's true that, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the truth of politics in general. A lot of people support the headline rather than the policy itself. And as a leftist, as a socialist, I've always been in favour of making the argument to change people's minds. It's why if I was ever, not that I ever would be, but if I was like leader of the Labour Party, I personally wouldn't become more hardline in immigration because I think it's electorally viable. I would try and make the argument, actually, this is why we shouldn't pursue this policy. But that's irrelevant, isn't it? The headline from the policy, even though we can decipher the difference when you're trying to get people to vote for you, it doesn't really matter. If that's someone's opinion, that's someone's opinion. Again, I would like to see political parties trying to persuade people, but maybe it's too difficult. Maybe Labour had to do this. Again, it's more devil's advocate here. Lewis, I want to bring you in. What do you think? I mean, is this, again, in terms of policy, it's pretty grotesque, but don't we have to accept, at least on, I don't know, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to law and order, when it comes to policing, the British people are a bit more conservative?
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment that people, they want the headline. It's almost like it's a populist thing, isn't it? Like they just want to hear that this thing has happened without really going too much deeply into the actual details. But I think at the same time, I do feel like the British people overall are pretty moldable, right? I feel like I've witnessed personally that if the British people are sold the right story about anything, that they can change their minds. I don't want to go too deep into this, but obviously the idea of like how we managed to successfully sell the story of supporting Ukraine to the point where, we allowed people to come up with a program where people could come over here and stay in people's homes, which yes, we can argue about, like it's, white people versus brown people, and there's an element of racism in there, like that's a different argument. But the fact that we managed to convince people to do that and have the vast majority of the country back Ukraine, back people coming here, back giving them money, I feel like the British people are very moldable. So what we actually need is a person who is willing to stand up and tell a very powerful story of why we need immigration, why we need people here, because all it takes is the right person to sell the story, and no one's brave enough to do that.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, you are right in terms of like allowing, well, actually the state literally paying people to house Ukrainian refugees. But again, I do think that's a massively racialized issue, not in terms of like the policy itself, but like people accepting that policy. If people, I'm sorry, but I do think it's easier to tell to someone, say, a Western ally, a largely white country wants to live in your house and will pay you for it. I feel like people, on the whole, are more ready to accept that than say, here's a poorer nation in the global south, which, by the way, we had a lot to do with why it's so poor, wants to come live in your house. I don't think people are going to accept that as easily. But again, so I don't know. I'm not sure if I agree that, like, oh, we just need the right person to sell the thing. Because in terms of immigration, right, we've had a lot of pretty good people. We've had, I mean, even in this election, I think the Greens and actually the SNP, Stephen Flynn, I think has been quite good in terms of rhetoric, in terms of immigration and linking it to like staff shortages, right? We've had probably, I'd argue, the right people say the right thing. But immigration is such a big issue for people that it's not quite as easy as that. I'm not sure if we could just be solved by changing the wording of the argument and suddenly we've now made people more pro-immigration.
If I could just very quickly reply, Callum, I know you really want to come in, but I want to reply quickly because somebody needs to have a brave conversation about migration, because we're heading in this direction where the Labour Party have picked up the Tory mantle, have been like, trying to be, anti-immigration, stop the boats, all this type of stuff. They're going about it in a different way. But again, with the Yvette Cooper story, it's showing they're almost trying to appeal into the same people in the same way the Tory party did, right? But somebody needs to have a positive conversation about migration, and nobody is brave enough to stand up for it. Our birth rate is slowing down. We need migration. It is as simple as that. I don't even think if you threw money at the issue of skilling up people for the jobs that we need, even that would be enough. We need migration. It's as simple as that. And somebody needs to, at some point, be brave enough to stand up and actually have that conversation in a positive way. Because if not, it's going to be our undoing, because we need it.
Okay, we're going to move on, but before we do, Callum, you do want to quickly jump in.
I agree with Lewis on this one thing, and when you what happened with the Ukraine situation was that the media were on side as well, which obviously helped massively, but there was a strong voice in government, i.e. the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson at the time, talking about we need to do our bit to help these people because these are our allies, these are our friends, and this terrible thing's happening to them, so let's help them. And if there was someone, just to echo Lewis's point, if there was someone doing that, about people that are fleeing Syria, that are fleeing, even people that are coming from elsewhere in the Middle East, people that are coming from the global south, whether it's climate refugees, whether it's people fleeing war, whoever it is, these people that are coming across in boats, if we were actually pushing the narrative that these are our friends, these are people who have gone through a really horrible thing and we should open our arms and help them, I think even that would help the situation. Of course, there's the race issue, and that is clear throughout this, but when it's sold as let's do the British thing and come together to help other people, it worked really successfully. If Boris Johnson had just turned around and said there's loads of Ukrainians that need somewhere to live because they're refugees, will you take them? Most people in this country would probably have said no. It was because they had all the spiel that went with it to say why we need to have them. So I do have to agree with Lewis.
I'm going to be a bit controversial. I'm going to jump in, not to do with you guys, but one of our commenters, and I'm getting a little bit pissed off, so I'm going to pull you out. Aidan Wellsmith, I'm going to show you this comment. Sorry, this one here. Now, Aidan's been in the chat. I've been reading your comments throughout, and you said some pretty fucked up stuff by saying that we hate Jews because we stand for Palestinians. And I've been ignoring you, but I'm going to pull you up now. You're talking about lower population, more wealthy person. Aidan, are you a fucking stupid person? You clearly are stupid. That's not how it works. You don't just suddenly have less people and suddenly there's more money in people's pockets. You don't understand the economy. That's not how the economy works. You don't understand the economy of scale. When there's more people in the country, the economy grows. You need people to keep the economy going. Now, if you suddenly have a smaller population, that doesn't mean that you get more money in your pocket. It's about wealth distribution as well. So it doesn't matter if you are a small or large country. If you don't have good redistributive policies, you're still going to be screwed over. Now, we could be Little England. We could have 30 million people in this country. But if we decided to tax the wealthy a bit more and use that money to fund our public services, or if we had stronger unions or higher minimum wage, then we would have more money in pockets for workers. If you're in America, a population of 300 million, it's a pretty shitty place to live if you're the average worker, because we have billionaires, even trillionaires there, and because they've hoarded their wealth and they have weak unions too. So, Aidan, I've put up with your shit the entire show, and I'm pretty sick of it. And no, we don't hate Jewish people. We just don't like a genocide against the Palestinians. Sorry to cut you guys off there, but we are going to go to our last story. Now, we're going to stick on with the Labour Party, and we're going to talk about the two-child benefit cap. Laura Kuenssberg interviewed Rachel Reeves, and in the clip we showed earlier, Rachel Reeves said, we can't do anything about it because it cost £3 billion. But then you contrast that to Keir Starmer saying they will give £3 billion a year to Ukraine. Now, I know there's some people on the left, I'm pretty sure we're in agreement here. Some people on the left say, we shouldn't do it. I'm okay with sending money to Ukraine, who are on the end of Russian imperialism. They have literally been invaded. The same way as for Palestinians against Israel, but kind of destroys the argument that there's no money there, because it in their manifesto it said they support Ukraine, but it doesn't say that we will give £3 billion a year indefinitely, because Keir Starmer literally says for as long as it takes to Ukraine, but we won't lift 500,000 children out of poverty in our own country. Let's open up the panel.
I'm just hoping still, and I'm probably extremely naive for hoping so, and you're going to say that I'm giving the Labour Party too much credit. I am just hoping to God that they have something up their sleeve on this that they're going to pull out when the budget comes around in the autumn, because everyone was saying, recently, we've got the King's Speech coming up, and loads of Labour MPs are sort of giving like a wink and a nudge about, the two-child benefit cap, keep your eye out, and it wasn't there. And there's been a lot of optimism and a lot of talk about, they said they weren't going to do it and they didn't want to bring it in the campaign because they didn't want to put other voters off. But it's Labour, of course they're going to do it. They haven't done it. They haven't announced it. And I can only hope that this is going to be one of those things where they're waiting for the autumn budget, for the autumn statement, where they can come out and they can say, you know what, we found the money and we're going to do it. And I've got a horrible feeling that even that isn't going to happen. I just don't know. I just don't get it. I just do not get it. They have got an opportunity to lift so many children out of poverty that can be funded. Other parties had it in their manifestos and had costings for it. We know that we can afford it. And I cannot understand why they won't do it. So if they haven't got something else up their sleeve, or if they're not going to pull out a big surprise in the budget come the autumn, then I'm even more in shock and confused by what the Labour Party has become than I was up until this point. Because if they can't act on something that will provably bring children out of poverty, then who the fuck are they representing?
It feels strange that this is the hill that they want to die on, right? If they, it was in the news this weekend about how, the independent group of whatever have recommended a 5-point-something% pay rise on public sector workers, right? If they wanted to take that fight and be like, we can't afford that right now, we're going to give them a little bit less to make us look economically sensible and all of this and yada yada yada, I wouldn't back it, but I would get it. If they want to fight that war, go for it. It just feels like this one specifically with the two-child cap why die on this hill when I think there's other arguments that you could die on, which doesn't make you look like, milk snatching Margaret Thatcher. It just doesn't make sense. I don't get how they think they're benefiting from this, because I don't think it's only to do with like the idea of being like fiscally responsible. They've specifically chosen this one. They've sat around a table, they've planned this out, and they've said, this is the one that we're going to choose to make us look fiscally responsible. I just don't get why.
Well, I mean, they don't. So they've kind of they've tied themselves or painted themselves in the corner. I'm getting my fucking analogies wrong here, right? They won't change tack now because they don't want to give any power to the left. This is how pathetic they are. We've had Labour insiders literally say the reason they don't want to change the two-child benefit cap because they don't want to be seen as weak and beholden to the so-called left and Labour, even though Andy Burnham isn't that left-wing, is called for it. Gordon Brown, who is an actual centrist guy, maybe centre-left, I think he's centrist, right, has called for it. But the Labour Party are willing to change tack on immigration and social conservatism to try and fight the right, but they won't lift millions of kids out of poverty or half a million kids out of poverty.
Country before party, right? Country before party, right? What happened to that? That Downing Street statement only 2 weeks ago.
And you're right as well, because they've said, look, we want to be fiscally responsible. We're not going to pledge anything where we don't know the money's coming from, even though that is fiscally irresponsible. That's not how the economy necessarily works. And Rachel Reeves is the Chancellor, by the way. She can come up with many, many different ways to cough up the funds to bring kids out of poverty, like increasing taxes on the wealthy or a wealth tax. There are so many things that can be done, and she chooses not to. But even on their own rhetoric, they say, we can't find the money. They're then happy to spend money on defence and say, well, we're just going to spend money on Ukraine. Again, I have no issue sending money to Ukraine to fight Russia. But again, if you want to stick on this tack of being fiscally responsible, saying that we're going to give £3 billion a year indefinitely, which is a cop-out, that is not fiscally responsible. But so it just shows how utterly morally bereft they are.
This is why I think that this is why I'm quietly hopeful that they are going to sort of pull it out of the sleeve come the autumn statement, because it doesn't make any sense. They can talk about fiscal responsibility, but then, like you say, like they've found money for Ukraine, right? And again, I wouldn't necessarily agree with it, but they could easily make the argument and say, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to cut some of the money that we send abroad because we need to lift children out of poverty in our own country. Surely that is as good a reason as any to cut foreign aid. And I don't want to cut foreign aid at all. I think we need to be spending more to help other people in need. But it doesn't make sense. So surely they're going to U-turn on this. Like, how can they not?
History tells us that'll be true.
That's true. Yeah. Have U-turns and everything else. But I mean, Lewis, do you think there's another reason for this? Do you think this is more than them just trying to pander and appeal to the voters that they wanted to win? Because the argument all through the election on all of these issues that we've got with the Labour government now, the argument that a lot of Labour supporters made was, oh yeah, but it's just for them to get votes. Once they win the election, they'll actually be radical, and they've not done that. Like, do you think there's some other secret thing going on that the?
No, I think it is just as simple as they're trying to appeal to a group of people. They're doing multiple things, though, right? Excuse me. They're not just, portraying this idea that they're fiscally responsible. I think it's slightly deeper than that. I think they're also signaling that they're not the old Labour. Remember, Labour's reputation is, oh, they're the welfare state. They're going to hand out money to loads of people. They're going to, just let people go on to benefits like that. That's the reputation that Labour have had for decades. So again, I think they're almost trying to kill multiple birds with one stone by showing we're fiscally responsible, and also it's not going to be a welfare state under Labour. And I think, but they're failing. It's working against them, because now again, they're being compared to milk snatching Margaret Thatcher, which is the last person that you want to be compared to from anyone from the Tory party, to be honest.
I think what we're really missing here is quite simple. It's the fact that this is their politics. Rachel Reeves is very, very right-wing. She called for benefits to be tightened back in 2015. I mean, remember the welfare reform bill? Oh, sorry, the what was that? I mean, that was the American version, wasn't it? But in 2015, they wanted to reform welfare, and half the Labour Party abstained or even voted for it. You've got Liz Kendall, who is now in the department for DWP. She's incredibly right wing. So it's not about, oh, they want to show that they're a break from Corbynism or they're trying to win people over. This is their politics. This is who they are. They don't like supporting people on benefits. They are just right wing. They are just conservative on this issue and many other issues. It's pretty simple, really. And that's why I think Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, all the others who are in the cabinet are pretty deplorable people. I think that's quite clear. We could continue to talk on, but it is 10 o'clock.
If I may, very quickly, Curtis, just to give
you absolutely can. You absolutely can.
Tiny update from a topic from earlier. Kamala Harris has now tweeted out, and she's accepted the endorsement and said that she's going to run for it. So we will see what happens. Okay. I would just thought I'd give you that update because I've been monitoring.
Thank you for the update. There you go. Kamala Harris has officially said she's going to run for president. Whether she gets the delegates, I think she will. I think she will be the nominee. But yes, that is all we've got time for. Thank you for tuning in. We will be back with our regular Normal Island tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Now, if you like our work and you want us to become full-time, then you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 a month, or any one-off donation at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Help us grow a socialist independent media. This is just the beginning. I'm Curtis Daly, and see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.